The first thing you notice is the quiet. Not the absence of sound, but the kind that waits. The kind that feels like it's holding something underneath it. And as you drift closer to this pale green world, that quiet begins to change. A soft vibration runs through the atmosphere, stretching across the surface like a breath the planet hasn't quite finished letting go of. From a distance, the land looks smooth and unbroken, but the closer you move, the more the surface begins to move with the wind. Long waves running across endless fields of hollow grass, each blade waiting for the air to touch it. And when the wind finally reaches them, the silence folds open and the world answers in tone. What follows isn't music in the way we understand it. It's older, slower, a landscape that speaks by letting the wind move through it, region by region, voice by voice, and this is where we begin, drifting down toward the Murmuring Plains, to listen to a world that never stops breathing in sound. From a quiet distance in space, the planet looks unusually soft. Most worlds show you hard lines first, coastlines, mountains, ice caps. This one looks like someone exhaled a pale green sigh and wrapped it around a sphere. No sharp edges, no jagged scars, just a smooth wash of muted color, almost silvery where the star's light catches it, with faint waves and ripples that seem to drift across the surface. It takes a moment to realize those ripples aren't oceans. As you draw nearer, the illusion breaks apart into detail. The whole world is covered in grasslands, not broken by forests or continents as you'd expect, but arranged in vast belts and swirls, like someone combed the surface into long streaming patterns. The plains follow the curves of the planet's winds, laid out in enormous sweeping bands that loop from pole to pole. There are darker tracks winding through the softer green, as if something has brushed or burned a path, migration routes or fault lines where the vegetation changes. Here and there, you notice regions where the color shifts entirely, a bluish smear, a gold-toned basin, a faint violet halo around a distant plateau. Each region looks like its own instrument laid into a larger body. You still can't hear anything from up here, but the idea of sound is already there. The world looks composed, arranged. As you sink closer, the atmosphere grows from invisible to visible. There's a faint milky haze hugging the planet, not thick enough to hide the ground, but just enough to blur the edges of things. Light from the local star is caught and softened, giving the entire disk a calm, diffuse glow. Where the star sits behind the planet's limb, you can see the atmosphere as a thin, luminous ring, with subtle bands of pale green and blue threading through it. The air here is slightly denser than Earth's, with more suspended particles and moisture, and that matters. Denser air carries sound further. It lets even small movements leave long trails of vibration. You start to descend. The world's curve slowly straightens beneath you. Individual forms start to appear where there was only color before. You pass through that thin upper layer where everything goes quiet and distant, then drop into the lower atmosphere where things begin to feel close and heavy again. Clouds form only in certain zones on this planet, and they're not the towering storm columns you might expect. Most of the time they're slow, flat sheets that drift just above the plains, casting enormous soft-edged shadows. A few hang in stacked layers, like shelves of vapor. You move through one now. A grey-white thickness that dampens the light and mutes the surface into something soft and undefined. Inside the cloud, visibility narrows. Droplets cling briefly, suspended in the air rather than falling. A faint, cool dampness presses around you, and the sound of the world is still muted, like someone has turned the volume almost all the way down before the main track begins. And then you slip below the cloud layer. The first thing that hits you is color. The pale greens you saw from orbit sharpen into a patchwork of shades, all variations of grass, but nothing that feels monotonous. Some stretches are almost fluorescent, a bright mint tone that catches the light. Others are dull, grey-green mats sitting low and thick, as if weighed down by their own density. There are bands of amber grasses forming lakes of gold amongst the green, and in the distance, an entire region seems washed in a blue-tinged metallic sheen. The second thing is movement. The plains don't just sway randomly. Wind runs across them in organized fronts, pushing visible waves that roll and curve, intersect and split again. From above, it looks like a slow-motion version of sound waves scrolling across a screen, overlapping patterns, never completely still. But it's the third thing that truly defines this world. As the lower air wraps around you, the planet's voice finally reaches you. At first it's faint, a soft, breathy sigh rising up from the plains, a cluster of long tones that fade in and out. You might mistake it for distant machinery or an oddly tuned storm. But then the sound shifts and more layers slide in behind it. Higher notes tremble under the deeper ones. Some tones hold steady while others step up and down in small intervals. A few rise and fall in gentle, repeating arcs, like someone playing the same 4 notes over and over, slowly, but never quite the same way twice. Every blade of grass below you is hollow. Each one acts like a tiny flute, a pipe, a whistle, a narrow chamber with openings shaped by evolution to respond to specific speeds and directions of wind. Where on other worlds you just have rustling, here you get something closer to voices. You dip lower and the detail sharpens. The patch of plains beneath you is mostly a pale green variety of grass. Long, slightly flattened blades with swollen central chambers and tiny slits near the tips. When the wind hits them at a certain angle, they produce a soft, breathy tone, almost like air moving over the top of a bottle. When the gusts are stronger, the notes bend upwards slightly, giving them a plaintive, calling quality. In this region, the tones cluster around low, overlapping chords, nothing sharp or piercing. It's a kind of deep, constant backdrop, shaped by the prevailing wind. Every time the gusts strengthen, the volume rises and the harmonies swell. When they relax, the sound thins into a faint drifting murmur. You move out of that band and cross into another. Here the grass is shorter and darker, with finer tubes and more openings along the sides. The sound changes instantly. The low background hum is still there, carried from the region behind you, but new voices pile on top, high, chiming notes that flicker in and out like distant bells. They don't hold long, drawn-out tones. Instead, they come in bursts, quick, bright pips and tremors that shimmer over the deeper foundation. The plains here are colder, closer to a highland climate. The air density changes slightly with altitude, which shifts the exact frequencies these hollow blades produce. A tiny difference in temperature means a noticeably different tone. So this area has its own signature, a specific pattern of notes that repeats over seasons and cycles. To anyone spending enough time here, the sound would be as familiar as a skyline. As the wind shifts direction, you hear an entire valley's worth of grass change pitch together. It's not a clean jump, but a slow slide. Notes bend, slipping into new relationships. A low moan becomes a mid-level hum. A chime thickens into a more mellow tone. It's like listening to a single vast instrument being tuned in real time by a restless atmosphere. The world doesn't have one melody. It has countless overlapping ones, always in flux. You drop lower still, until the individual grass clusters aren't just texture but visible forms. Each tuft rises from the soil like a small organ pipe array, dozens of hollow blades gathered at their base, splitting upwards into a fan. Tiny variations in length and thickness matter. Even a millimeter's difference changes the note. The wind sweeps across them and they answer. A soft gust passes, and one cluster responds with a breathy low note. A second cluster a little further along adds a slightly higher tone. A third one, shaped differently, contributes a wavering, brassy sound. Together they form a chord that exists only for as long as that particular gust holds its shape. Then the air shifts, and the combination dissolves into something new. The planet is constantly composing itself. You skim along a shallow valley. The sound here grows richer, not because the grass is different, but because the terrain bends the wind. Gentle slopes funnel moving air into certain channels, compressing it, speeding it up, slowing it down. Where the valley narrows, the tones grow brighter and thinner, like the wind is being pushed through tighter throats. Where it widens, the sound relaxes, spreading out into broader, deeper notes. Even without seeing the land, you could map the shape of this valley by listening to it. The atmosphere itself carries the sound far. That slightly denser air with a higher moisture content allows vibrations to travel for long distances without losing much strength. Somewhere far off, beyond the horizon, another region is singing its own arrangement, and you can hear the faint echo of it, stretched thin but present, layered behind the closer tones like a ghost melody. The plains are never truly silent here. Even in the calmest moments, some part of the planet is breathing out sound. A distant swell of notes, a soft, rattling hiss, a scattered chime. Overhead, clouds crawl across the sky, their shadows gliding in slow procession. When a shadow passes over the plains, the grass responds not just to the change in light, but to the subtle shift in temperature. Cooler air changes the behavior of the wind, tightening or loosening its grip on the blades. You can hear the difference. Under the shade, some pitches drop fractionally, as though the plains are lowering their voices. Now you drift towards the boundary between two major sound regions. From above, the border is visible as a loose line running across the landscape. On one side, the grass is taller, with thicker hollow cores and fewer openings, designed for deeper, resonant tones. On the other side, the vegetation forms dense mats of finer, tube-like blades that specialize in a narrow range of high, clear notes. As you move across that line, the sound changes, like you've stepped from one hall into another. Behind you, the low, rolling hum of the tallgrass region fades. Ahead, the air gets busy with delicate, repeating patterns. Tiny trills, quick rises and falls, like a field full of glassy whistles being swept in waves. There's an almost conversational quality to it. The tones don't just sit and drone, they flicker, respond, and echo each other. There's structure here. Not random noise, not simple reaction. The plains have grown along the planet's wind climate over millions of years. Regions that experienced sharp, fast-moving gusts favored shorter grasses with quick, bright responses. Areas dominated by long, steady winds favored slower, deeper tones. Over time, each belt refined itself into a specific sound set, a voice that matched its weather. Where those belts collide, you get edges like this. Zones where two very different sound worlds overlap and blend. Standing there, you'd hear one plain's low chorus downwind and the other's high flurries upwind, carried to you at the same time. Far below, close to the ground where the grass stems meet the soil, the sound is thicker, more physical. Vibrations run through the stalks and into the earth. The soil here is loose and filled with organic matter, and it transmits those vibrations well. Even a small patch of plains can send a noticeable hum through the ground when the wind picks up, and that's where the smallest inhabitants come in. You're still too high to see them clearly, but every so often the soundscape ripples in a way that isn't caused by wind alone. A brief, stuttering interruption, a tiny, percussive pattern. Down among the hollow blades, small creatures move in the spaces between stems. They are adapted to this world of constant sound. Light-bodied, with limbs designed for short, precise jumps. When they launch themselves from one cluster of grass to another, their feet and bodies tap against the hollow tubes, producing quick clicks, taps, and knocks. In most places, that would be incidental, barely noticeable over the background noise. Here, where everything resonates, those little impacts become part of the composition. A single creature hopping through a cluster creates a brief run of small beats. A group of them moving together turns into a scattering of percussive phrases layered over the plain's continuous tones. They don't have to be doing it deliberately. Their basic movement just naturally interacts with the environment. For now, from this height, you only hear the faint suggestion of it, a quiet patter of tiny impacts occasionally breaking through the wind song, like someone tapping lightly on glass beneath a choir. You glide onwards. The star above is gentle here, its light slightly warmer than you might expect from the cool-colored plains. It hangs at an angle that suggests late afternoon, with shadows stretching long and soft across the landscape. The hollow blades catch that light along their curved surfaces, so every gust sends a shimmer running over the fields, not just movement, but a subtle flashing of highlights as blades rotate and tilt. In certain angles, the plains look almost metallic, like brushed steel caught in motion. In others, they soften into something closer to velvet under a dim lamp. You pass over a shallow rise and the sound shifts again. On the far side, the wind hits a series of low, rolling hillocks arranged in loose chains. The air is forced to climb over each one, then dip down again, and each little climb and fall changes speed just enough to trigger different responses in the grass. The result is a pulsing pattern. Waves of tone rising in surges, then thinning, then rising again in a slow, steady cycle. To a traveler on foot, this world wouldn't just be a place you cross. It would be something you listen to every step. The path you choose would determine the soundtrack that follows you, from deep, enveloping hums to bright, chattering fields. But for now, you are still above it all, moving over a living instrument. The Murmuring Plains stretch away in every direction, merging into dim blue at the horizon. No cities break the landscape. No visible roads cut across it. If there is any larger intelligence here, it is quiet, woven into the way these plains have learned to speak with air. The world keeps breathing and singing beneath you. And as you drift further along this first journey over its surface, the sound thickens, deepens, and spreads, preparing to show you how varied a single idea can become when an entire planet is built around it. Dropping closer to the surface, the air settles into a steadier weight around you. The higher altitude haze peels away and the plains start filling the whole field of view. No more distant sweep of the horizon, just an endless expanse of hollow blades rising and falling under the wind. Down here, the sound isn't something drifting up from far below. It surrounds you, wraps around you, presses gently against you like a moving tide. The tones thicken as the ground comes nearer. What was once a soft, blended harmony becomes full-bodied, more defined. Each gust now feels like it has personality. One arrives low and smooth, sliding across the plains like a long-held note. The next arrives broken into short bursts, scattering quick chimes and whistles across the grass before fading again. You slow over a region where the wind is funneling through what looks like shallow channels formed naturally over ages. The plains aren't perfectly flat. Subtle ridges and dips shape the airflow like bowls and troughs in a resonant instrument. The grass here is shorter, darker and thicker at the base. When the wind threads through these channels, the tones become focused, almost directional. You can actually follow the path of a gust by listening to it, starting as a low hum on one ridge, then climbing into a brighter sweep as it drops into a pocket of cooler air, before thinning out into a trembling whistle at the far end. Every blade contributes. Every cluster answers. None of them sound alone for more than a heartbeat. You drift lower still until each grass blade stands clearly, thin, hollow tubes with delicate slits that quiver with even the slightest movement. Some blades have tiny branching tendrils near their tips, like little tuning forks grown from living tissue. When the wind catches these, they vibrate in rapid, multi-toned layers. One blade might create a single pure note, another will respond with a quick trill, a third will make a faint rattling undertone like a wooden flute with a loose reed. A breeze rolls over the area, and the plains respond with a rising, shimmering chord that swells and then tapers off, as though the world is breathing steadily in and out. You can feel the vibration in the air itself, subtle but constant. Now and then, the wind slows just enough for pockets of sound to isolate. A small area falls briefly out of sync with the rest, and you hear individual grass voices. A thin whistle rising an octave higher than the rest, a dull thrum vibrating stubbornly against the wind, a single blade producing a sound so soft it feels more like a memory than a note. And then the breeze returns, folding everything back into one unified murmur. As you move forward, the land changes again. The plains sag gently into a long depression, too shallow to call a canyon, but enough to coax the wind into an entirely different behavior. The air here doesn't rush across the surface, it curls. Circular flows form naturally, like slow eddies on a river. When these turning winds pass through the hollow grass, they produce a distinct effect. The notes wobble, not chaotic shaking, but a steady, rhythmic oscillation. A single tone pulses up and down in a controlled pattern, almost like a creature breathing through a vibrating throat. Multiple grass clusters caught in these swirling breezes hum together, creating a strange, undulating harmony that moves in loops around the basin. Crossing above the depression, you can hear the entire formation rotating, not visually but in sound. Each pass of the circulating wind lifts one pitch and softens another. After a full rotation, the harmony returns to its starting point, like a slow-turning wheel of sound. Past the basin, you enter a zone where the plains are dotted with taller growths, still grass, still hollow, but stretched to 2 or 3 times the height of the blades around them. These towers bend heavily under the wind, swaying in arcs that look almost slow motion from your vantage. Their tone is something else entirely. When the wind pushes through them, they resonate like colossal, breathy horns. The sound has a thickness to it, a rounded depth, as if the air is moving through a series of long tubes carved into canyon walls. They don't speak often, only when gusts arrive strong enough to push the tower grass into the right angle. But when they do, the note spreads far across the landscape. It isn't loud, just wide. You can feel it stretching outward, rolling through the surrounding plains and brushing against the higher, sharper tones of the shorter vegetation. One of these taller blades dips, catches the wind just right, and releases a deep, echoing tone that hovers for several long seconds before fading. Around it, the hollow mats of shorter grass respond almost automatically, layering softer, quicker tones over the fading horn. It's as if the plains recognize that space and try to fill it. Closer to the ground now, you start noticing the small tremors beneath the grass. They're subtle, tiny vibrations running along the soil like footsteps felt rather than heard. And then the sound follows. Soft taps, light clicks, faint little knocks rolling in irregular patterns. The plains' smaller inhabitants are finally close enough to hear clearly. Down between the hollow blades, the creatures move in bursts. Their bodies are small and lightweight, shaped to slip through tight gaps without disturbing the grass too much. But the moment they hop, just a single jump, their landing pads hit the hollow stems with a bright percussive pop. Each impact resonates inside the tubes, magnifying it into a quick, sharp beat. A couple of taps echo from a cluster near your left. Then another set, slightly faster, comes from the right. The creatures move in groups, or at least within earshot of each other. Their rhythms aren't predictable. Sometimes a small flurry, other times a single knock, followed by silence. Yet each one fits neatly over the plains' constant tones. They don't have any intention of creating music, but they do anyway. On this world, even the most basic movement becomes part of the soundscape. A gust passes through the tower grass again, sending out another long, droning call. Immediately after, a scatter of taps responds from below, half rhythmic, half chaotic, like tiny percussionists startled into motion. The tones of the grass dip around them, then rise again as the wind regains its steady flow. Farther ahead, the color of the plains shifts. What was once green begins to take on a subtle, silvery tint, like the blades are coated in a thin layer of frost, though the temperature hasn't changed. These grasses have thinner walls and multiple tiny openings along their length, not just at the tips. When the wind hits them, it splits into countless streams, each producing a faint whisper. Thousands of whispers layered together create a constant airy hush, softer than the tones behind, but dense with texture. Passing over this field is like listening to breath itself given shape. The sound isn't tonal in the same sense as the deeper regions. It's all whispering threads, rising and falling at the edges of hearing. When the wind strengthens, the hush becomes a pressure, almost warm. When it weakens, the sound dissolves into nothingness before slowly gathering again. The creatures seem to move differently here. Instead of hopping boldly, they navigate through the silvery blades with slower, lighter steps, tapping the grass less often. Maybe the thinner tubes don't withstand impact well. Maybe the acoustics here make their movements too obvious to potential predators. Maybe they simply prefer quieter zones. Whatever the reason, the percussion here is rare, isolated pips rather than clusters. You drift on. Ahead, the plains rise into a wide plateau. The color brightens again, back into greens and golds that mixed like brushed paint across the landscape. The wind arrives in clean, straight fronts here, nothing swirling or layered, and the sound reflects that. The tones are pure and unwavering, like lines drawn firmly across the air. There's no trembling or wobbling here, just long, stable notes that hold until the wind decides otherwise. Crossing the edge of the plateau, you catch the sound of the plains below lifting into a massive, unified chord as the wind pushes up the slope. Thousands of blades respond together, their hollow bodies vibrating so strongly you can see some of them quiver with the naked eye. The chord rings out. It's smoother than thunder, calmer, but it has that same sense of scale, a sound large enough to belong to a world, not a thing living on it. From this height, you can see how the grass is arranged across the plateau, bands of taller hollow blades interspersed with fine, whispering mats. Long ribbons of bright blue-green grass run like rivers down gentle declines, forming pathways where the grass tones shift gently from one key into another. Below you, something moves. A small cluster of those little hopping creatures bursts from one patch of grass, scattering into another. Their impacts rattle through the hollow tubes, producing a series of sharp clacks that cut through the plateau's steady hum. It's not rhythmic, not in the sense of a pattern you could follow, but it adds a brief spiking texture that stands out clearly before fading back into the wind's sustained tone. From here, you can look across the landscape and imagine how these plains sound hour by hour, season by season. The wind shifts slowly around the planet, carrying warmth or coolness with it, altering the density of the air just enough to change the grass tones. Rainfall changes the pitch as moisture enters the hollow blades. Droughts lower their flexibility, making their notes more brittle, more airy. This world isn't just musical, it's reactive. Its sound evolves with weather more directly than any planet you've visited before. Now the wind changes direction again. Not dramatically, just a slow, steady lean to one side. But the effect is immediate. The tones drop a little, soften. What was bright becomes mellow. What was airy becomes thicker. The whispering fields behind you dim, blending with the plateau's deeper, smoother notes. Ahead, the plains begin to descend once more, falling into a rolling belt of land where the grass is longer and more flexible. The hollow blades here produce mixed tones, low and high at once, depending on which part of the blade catches the wind. This produces harmonics that shimmer and shift constantly, like two voices trying to sing the same note but never quite aligning. The small creatures seem especially active here. Their taps bounce through the tubes with surprising clarity. One leaps across a patch, sending a spray of hollow clicks rising through the grass. A moment later, another answers from further down the slope. For a few seconds, their scattered movements create something close to a pattern, accidental, lively and perfectly in tune with the landscape's shifting tones. Here, the soundscape feels alive, not in the sense of consciousness, but in momentum. Everything seems to be moving, even when nothing physically shifts. The tones glide, the wind spills, the world exhales. You stay low to the ground, letting the full weight of the plains sound surround you. It's not overwhelming, just immersive, a natural presence that's been shaping life here long before you arrived. The path ahead leads into new sound regions, places where the grasses change color again, or new formations rise from the plains, or the wind funnels itself into something unexpected. The Murmuring Plains are wider than they look, and their voice has only begun to unfold. The plains begin sloping downward into a region where the land folds into long, shallow troughs. From above, it looks like the world has been gently pressed by a giant hand, leaving wide impressions that curve and taper like dried waves. These dips aren't dramatic enough to be canyons, but they're deep enough to hold pockets of cooler air and redirect the wind in ways that change everything you've heard so far. As you drift lower, the first noticeable shift is the texture of the sound. The open plains behind you produce tones that travel freely, spreading out like distant voices calling across long fields. But here, the sound becomes tighter. It curls around the edges of the troughs, gathering strength and direction. The hollow grass blades aren't simply responding to the wind, they're shaping it, guiding the flow of air in controlled, narrow paths. You descend into the first of these long valleys. Instantly, the sound compresses. The tones sweep upward in intensity, layered closely together. Lower notes throb through the ground, vibrating up the slopes. Higher whistles skim the surface of the taller grass patches. Even the mid-range hums shift from broad breezes to concentrated streams, like air forced through the throat of an instrument. The walls of the valley rise on either side, not steep but smooth, etched with gentle lines where generations of wind have combed the grass in steady, repeating patterns. The blades here grow longer and more flexible, bending easily under the compressed air currents. Each blade has multiple openings along its length, creating an effect where a single gust can coax 3 or 4 different tones out of one strand. A wind pulse rolls through the valley, and the grass responds with a sweeping harmony that starts low at the base of the trough and climbs upward in a spiraling motion. It feels like listening to a single chord being built from the bottom up, deep vibrations joining first, then the rounded midtones, then finally the bright, trembling whistles at the peaks. The sound rings just long enough to fill the air before relaxing again into a quieter murmur. Then the next wind pulse follows. Further along the valley floor, you begin noticing small circular depressions where the grass changes color. These patches are denser, darker, almost bluish-green. They look like shallow bowls lined with slightly thicker, hollow blades that angle inward toward the center. Wind hitting the edges of these bowls spirals inward, creating a focused column of airflow that exits through the center like a vertical breath. The sound this produces is different from anything else on the plains. A long, rising hum erupts from one of the bowls, smooth at first, then tightening, lifting in pitch as the spiral strengthens. When it peaks, the tone breaks into a delicate flutter, like a reed vibrating under strain. The flutter dances upward before dissolving entirely, replaced by a warm, lingering aftertone. You pass over another bowl, and the same thing happens, but deeper and slower. No two make the same sound. Their differences come from slight variations in shape, density, and the thickness of the blades. The bowls form a kind of natural resonant array, each one adding a unique voice to the valley. As you continue, another sound begins to emerge beneath the tones, a soft clicking pattern, irregular at first, then repeating faintly. Closer inspection reveals the small creatures again. They're moving along the sloped walls of the valley in groups. The creatures here appear slightly larger than the ones on the open plains, though still small enough to vanish among the grass if they remain still. When one hops, its landing sends a sharp tap through several blades, but in the troughs the sound carries farther. The curved slopes reflect the taps inward, bouncing them toward the center of the valley like tiny percussive echoes. One group moves across a patch of tall, wide-bladed grass. Their landing vibrations run through the stems, producing a soft wooden knock, almost hollow, almost musical. They hop again, and the sound repeats, but shifted slightly as they cross into another patch with thinner tubes. A second group jumps down the slope and moves into one of the resonant bowls. Their impacts strike the inward-facing blades, creating small bursts of staccato rhythm that ring out with surprising clarity before vanishing under the next wind pulse. None of this is coordinated. The creatures aren't performing. Their movement simply becomes part of the environment's sound, quick beats and tiny pulses layered over the valley's larger, more controlled harmonies. But sometimes, by coincidence alone, their activity aligns. A deeper wind surge rolls through the valley, pulling a full chorus of tones from the grass. As it peaks, two groups of the small creatures leap simultaneously. Their combined taps create a brief scatter of sharp percussive notes, timed almost perfectly with the crest of the wind's resonance. The effect is startling, like the valley suddenly developed a rhythm section. Moments later, the gust softens and the creatures move on, leaving the valley's natural tones to settle back into gentle murmurs. The further you travel, the more the troughs deepen. The grass thickens along the valley base, forming tangled clusters of long, hollow tubes that sway close together. Their tones are rich and heavy. When the wind pushes into these dense pockets, the notes deepen into chesty hums that vibrate through the soil. You drift closer to the ground, and the hum becomes tactile, a steady, low vibration that resonates through the air and into the earth beneath. This area feels older. The grass blades here show signs of long-term growth, thicker at the base, some bearing faint scars from years of bending under strong gusts. A powerful wind rolls in from the far end of the valley, whistling between the slopes as it compresses and accelerates. When it reaches the densest patch of grass, the entire cluster responds at once with a resonant blast of deep, rounded tones. The sound swells into something broad and powerful, filling the valley so completely that it momentarily drowns out everything else, even the faint taps of the creatures. It fades slowly, leaving a warmth hanging in the air. The sound almost feels like the ground itself is releasing breath after holding tension. As you rise from the valley floor, the view opens across multiple parallel troughs stretching outward like ripples frozen in place. Each one bends the wind differently. Some produce tight spiraling tones. Others amplify low hums that seem to run through the soil more than the air. A few are nearly silent until a major gust arrives, at which point they erupt in sudden bursts of tone. Above the troughs, the wind becomes more layered again. Different air currents meet at odd angles, weaving together in ways that feel unpredictable. But below the varied currents, the plains continue their steady composition, shaping each breeze into something more than simple movement. As you drift along the ridge between two valleys, you hear the tonal contrast clearly. One side sings with deep, unbroken hums. The other side is full of quicker, trembling fluctuations. Crossing from one to the other feels like walking from one room to another during a concert. Same performance, different acoustics. Far ahead, a faint shimmer suggests a transition zone where the plains will shift yet again into something new. The wind direction leans slightly that way now, carrying hints of higher, thinner tones, blades that may be narrower, or perhaps arranged in tighter formations. For now, though, the resonance valleys continue beneath you, filling the air with layered sound that never repeats exactly the same way twice. Every gust, every shift in pressure, every tiny creature landing on a hollow stem, all of it creates a world where sound is not an effect, but a constant, evolving presence. You stay with it a little longer, letting the tones rise and fall in rolling waves as you travel deeper along the planet's murmuring belt. Ahead lies another sound region, one shaped by sharper winds, different vegetation, and entirely new harmonies waiting to be uncovered. As the resonance valleys flatten out, the landscape begins to shift again. The troughs gradually soften, their slopes easing into wide, gentle plains that stretch ahead in bright, reflective colors. At first, the change is subtle. The grass blades look a little lighter, a little finer, but the closer you drift, the more obvious it becomes. The plains here shimmer, not in a decorative way, not as a trick of the sun, but as a physical property of the grass. The blades are coated in a naturally smooth, almost glassy surface that catches the light and sends it rolling away in soft glints. Even a slight breeze turns the whole field into a moving reflection, like sunlight rippling through a shallow pool. As the light dances, so does the sound. The first thing you notice is the higher clarity. The tones here don't blur or blend the way they did in the deeper valleys. They ring. Even the faintest wind produces sharp, crystalline notes that cut cleanly through the air. You descend lower, entering the upper edge of what locals, if any existed, might call the shimmer fields. The grass is finer than anything you've passed so far. Each blade is no thicker than a thin wire, yet perfectly hollow from root to tip. Near the top, dozens of tiny slits form natural apertures that act like miniature flutes. Unlike the earlier grasses, which produced long, breathy tones or deep, rounded hums, these blades specialize in quick, bright pitches. The notes they create are short-lived but intense, ringing out like delicate metallic chimes. A soft wind sweeps across the plains, and the shimmer fields respond instantly. A cascade of tiny tones ripples outward, starting near the surface and climbing upward like a wave of chimes breaking across a quiet beach. The sound spreads wide, layering itself into thousands of overlapping notes that all share a surprisingly consistent pitch. It doesn't sound chaotic, it sounds organized, like everything is tuned to a particular scale. You move deeper into the shimmer fields, and the sound brightens even more. The air vibrates with thin, luminous tones that tingle in your ears. There's no heaviness here, no deep hum running under the surface. The entire region speaks with light voices. Every step closer to the ground sharpens the clarity. Those tiny slits in each blade seem engineered by evolution to resonate with incredible precision. Even changes in temperature of a degree or two alter their pitch. Here, where the atmosphere is slightly drier and the ground is covered in a pale, reflective crust of mineral sediment, the tones rise higher than in any region you've passed so far. A breeze passes again, this time stronger, and the plains erupt into something like a shimmering choir. Each grass blade vibrates with its own note, but because they're so similar in size and shape, the tones align naturally, forming a broad, pure chord that expands outward like a ringing bell. It lasts longer than you'd expect from such small things. When the breeze fades, the sound doesn't drop immediately. The blades continue vibrating, their glassy surfaces catching the leftover air currents and sustaining the last threads of tone until everything quiets again into a faint, warm hum. Then you begin hearing the other residents of the shimmer fields. At first, you register nothing more than thin tapping noises, faint ticks scattered across the plains. Then one grows louder, clearer, sharper. There, a small creature leaps from one grass tuft to another, and the wires of hollow blades beneath it vibrate like plucked strings. Instead of the dull clacks you heard in the valleys, these creatures produce bright, pinging percussive sounds with each landing. The hollow tubes here act almost like tuned rods. When struck, they ring. Another creature follows, tapping down on several blades in quick succession. It creates something close to a short melody, accidental but strangely fitting. The shimmer fields amplify their movements noticeably, as if the whole landscape is built to emphasize even the smallest impact. You drift down far enough to catch a brief glimpse of one of them. It darts between the blades with remarkable precision, its limbs short but strong. Its body is covered in a thin, flexible exoskeleton that seems to dampen noise when it moves, but amplifies it when it jumps. Its landing pads strike the blades at angles that produce high, clear tones, each hop sending a tiny musical burst across the plains. A cluster of the creatures suddenly scatters from one patch of grass. The resulting cascade of bright taps rings through the shimmer fields like someone brushing a hand across a set of delicate bells. The grass catches the vibrations and carries them outward in a soft, fading ripple. But the wind quickly returns with its own answer. A gust from the east sweeps across the plains, and immediately the sound climbs in intensity. The grass reacts so quickly that the tones seem to rise before the wind even arrives, blades bending forward in anticipation, their hollow chambers adjusting to the approaching current. The gust hits full force, and the shimmer fields erupt. Thousands of blades vibrate at once, producing a dense but incredibly clear harmony that feels like standing inside an enormous glass instrument. The pitch rises slightly as the wind strengthens, then levels out, forming a sustained, ethereal chord that lingers long after the gust moves on. The smaller creatures freeze during the gust, whether through instinct or necessity is unclear, but once the wind relaxes, they resume hopping, their taps creating tiny percussive accents to the plain's long, ringing tones. You skim across a region where the grass seems to thicken into patches of iridescent blue. These blades are taller and more rigid, with sharply angled openings that produce piercing whistles when the wind pushes directly through them. The whistles don't dominate the area. They simply thread themselves through the other tones like thin, bright lines. When the wind hits the blue patches head-on, the grass lets out a series of high, crystal-like shrieks that shimmer above the lower tones. They aren't harsh. They're too clear for that, precise, cutting through with an almost medical purity. These areas stand out in the soundscape like accent notes, scattered across the shimmer fields to give structure to the otherwise broad, swirling harmonies. Farther ahead, you pass over a shallow incline. The grass thins and widens, revealing areas where the mineral crust beneath reflects the sky in patches of color. These reflective surfaces alter the temperature of the air just above them, creating warm and cool pockets that shift the pitch of the blades moment to moment. The sound here feels alive, not in a biological sense, but in a physical one. The tones change subtly with every breath of wind, every drift of shade, every ripple of warm air rising from the ground. A thicker gust pushes up the incline behind you, carrying with it a deeper, rolling tone from the valley. As it crosses into the shimmer fields, the grass responds with a burst of rising chimes, as though the plains recognize an approaching voice and answer it with their own. The gust continues, pushing the tones forward, and for a moment the deeper hum blends with the shimmering high notes, creating a layered harmony unlike anything you've heard so far. Warm foundation beneath brilliant surface. Ahead, the shimmer fields widen, stretching into a seemingly endless plain where the grass forms long, rippling ribbons of color: silver, blue, pale green, warm gold. Each ribbon corresponds to a slightly different species of hollow-blade grass. Each responds differently to wind, and as the ribbons move, their tones shift in waves that travel across the plains like drifting music. You travel across the first few ribbons and hear the transitions clearly. A silver ribbon produces crisp, bell-like tones. A blue ribbon answers with thin, glassy whistles. A gold ribbon hums softly under the surface. A pale green ribbon creates light, flickering notes that dance between the other tones like sparks. The effect is hypnotic. The shimmer fields feel less like a landscape and more like the luminous surface of a great instrument, one built not by hands but by millions of years of wind and vegetation refining each other. You drift a little lower, just above the blades. Here, sound becomes physical. Vibrations travel through the air in warm threads, running across your skin like waves of quiet pressure. Every gust alters the vibration pattern. Every shift in the wind's direction changes the color of the sound. A larger creature, something hidden until now, moves deep in the grass below. You don't see it, only the effect. Broad swaths of blades sway more dramatically, bending under a weight heavier than the small hoppers. The sound it creates is lower, a muted thumping resonance that spreads outward like a bass line under the shimmering chorus. Whatever it is, it moves slowly, carefully, disturbing the landscape only enough to leave a faint imprint of its passage. The shimmer fields react, adjusting to its movement with gentle tonal shifts rather than alarm. Ahead, the plains begin to darken slightly, a sign of yet another region where the sound will change again. But for now, the shimmer fields stretch around you in bright, ringing harmonies, each gust of wind revealing another of the world's hidden voices. This planet doesn't just murmur, sometimes it sings. The brightness of the shimmer fields fades as the land slopes again, dipping into a vast region where the colors dull and the light itself seems to soften. It isn't darker because of the star above, that still pours golden light across the world, but something about the ground here absorbs it, pulling the glare from the air and settling it into long shadows. These plains feel quieter from a distance, and for a moment you expect the sound to weaken. But as you descend, you realize the quietness isn't a lack of sound at all, it's a different kind of density. The tones here sit low, heavy, close to the ground. You drift into the first hollow. The grass grows taller than anywhere you've seen so far, each blade reaching well above human height. The tubes are broad near the base but taper sharply, thick-walled and sturdy. The openings aren't fine slits like in the shimmer fields, they're larger, almost like vents carved into the grass itself. This gives the sound a deeper, more resonant quality. A small breeze rolls across the surface and the hollows respond instantly. A deep, velvety tone rises, so low it's more pressure than pitch. It comes not from a single blade, but from thousands vibrating in unison. The sensation settles around you like a warm blanket, soft but powerful. When the wind strengthens, the tone expands into something round and cavernous, as if the plains themselves have immense lungs. Moving deeper, you realize why this region feels dimmer. The grass here is slightly translucent but tinted with a rich, smoky, grey-green tone that absorbs some of the light. When a gust passes through, the blades ripple, and their translucent bodies swell and contract with faint inner color shifts. Not bioluminescence, just the way the light refracts through them. The effect resembles shadows moving through water, and the sound that rises from it is unlike anything so far. Not high, not bright, a dull echoing resonance that carries for long distances without rising in pitch. You hover lower, close enough to hear individual tones emerge at a peer. The tall blades produce deep root tones, while thinner, shorter blades growing among them add faint harmonic layers, soft, pulsing murmurs that move like slow heartbeats beneath the primary resonance. The wind hits the hollow from a different angle, and the pitches bend around the terrain. This region is shaped by long, sunken pathways, low channels carved into the soil by centuries of constant airflow. They're not as neat or predictable as the resonance valleys earlier. These hollows twist like rivers, sometimes branching, sometimes merging. Wind dives into them and spirals like water finding its course. The effect on the sound is remarkable. The deep tones shift direction, moving left to right across the hollow like a rolling wave. Higher gliding murmurs ride the top of the sound, warbling slightly as the blades resonate with uneven gusts. When the wind hits a bend in the hollow, the pitch dips noticeably, like the plains sighing through a curved pipe. Then as the wind escapes into open space, the tones stretch outward, becoming warmer and fuller again. A cluster of shorter grass, only about knee-height, sits gathered in thick mats along the ridges of these hollows. Their hollow chambers are tiny but densely packed, producing the softest tones you've heard yet, almost like breath caught in a dark room. The mats hum faintly as wind passes over them, adding a subtle trembling texture beneath the deeper resonance. You hear the small creatures again, not the sharp, bright taps of the shimmer fields. Here their movements are softer, quieter, more like soft knocks or muted thuds. Their landing pads strike the thick-walled blades with dull impacts that resonate deeply, sending short pulses of bass through the hollow tubes. One leaps across a dense cluster, and the vibration spreads, a soft thum that blends seamlessly into the surrounding hum. Another jumps from a tall blade and lands on the ground, producing a faint double thud that sinks quickly into the soil. You finally glimpse one again, though only briefly. A round-bodied creature with short limbs and a thick layer of insulating tissue, likely adapted to living among these towering heavy grass formations. Its movements are slower, more cautious. Each hop is deliberate. And when it lands, the whole hollow reacts with a small, bassy pulse, as if acknowledging its presence. Farther ahead, the terrain becomes more dramatic. The hollows deepen into long trenches, winding through the plains like cracks carved into soft stone. You descend over one of these trenches and realize just how much they shape the planet's sound. Wind enters the trench from above, accelerates and compresses. When it pushes through the narrowest sections, the grass lining the walls resonates with intense, focused tones that sound like the low notes of a wind instrument played in a cavern. The trench begins with a soft hum, then a deeper rumble. Then suddenly a long, echoing note emerges. It's not loud, it's not piercing, it's enormous. A tone that feels ancient, slow, and impossibly wide. The sound rolls through the trench like fog, lingering, clinging to the grass-lined walls before rising and diffusing into the air above. You feel it in your chest more than you hear it with your ears, a physical vibration carried through both ground and air. The deeper into the trench the wind moves, the more layers join in. Along the lowest point of the hollow, the grass grows thicker and stiffer. The tubes are long and straight, perfect for producing pure resonant tones. When the wind hits them, they respond with unwavering clarity. Low notes stack on deeper notes, stack on faint, pulsing undertones. You move slightly upward and the tone shifts, as if the trench is tuning itself based on where the listener stands. At the far end of the trench, the walls flare outward. The grass here is shorter, paler, and more flexible. As the wind escapes the constricted path, the tones suddenly rise in pitch, dozens of small, shimmering overtones blooming like sparks after a controlled burn. The transition feels almost musical, a single deep note, then a soft swell of higher whispers. Then silence again as the wind settles. The small creature seems to avoid this exact area, probably because the stronger wind currents make movement unpredictable. Instead, they cluster at the edges, hopping along safer patches where the grass blades are more forgiving. One leaps onto a tall blade, slides slightly as the blade bends, then hops down again. The deep tone it produces melds seamlessly into the hum rising from the trench below. This world has a way of making every movement, no matter how clumsy or small, sound intentional. You continue drifting through the twilight hollows. The deeper you go, the more varied the shapes become. Some hollows form wide basins filled with slowly swirling winds that keep the tones constantly shifting. Others form narrow corridors of compressed air that produce piercing harmonics when the gusts align just right. There are even places where the tones stop entirely for a few seconds, held suspended in a strange silence before returning with renewed depth. And deeper still, there are hints of something else, a faint shimmer in the air, a vibration too low to pinpoint. a pattern that seems to repeat, not regularly, but recognizably. It's not language, not thought, not deliberate, just something in the way the deepest hollows interact with each other, exchanging tones across long distances, like distant calls that never quite resolve into a message. A natural resonance network, perhaps, or something the plains evolved without purpose beyond the shaping of wind. Whatever it is, the twilight hollows feel like the planet's lower register, its deep voice, its grounding breath. And ahead, the ground rises into a lighter region once more, where new grasses, new colors, and new sounds are waiting. The twilight hollows eventually begin to lift, the deep resonant trenches climbing toward higher ground. The shift isn't abrupt. The land eases upward in long, gentle sweeps, as though the planet is pushing you back toward the open air after letting you wander through its lowest notes. The air grows a little lighter with each meter of elevation, and the tones of the hollows fade into the distance, swallowed by the rising plains. As you ascend, the grass changes again, not in color at first, but in posture. The blades begin standing straighter, thinner at the base, longer at the tip, almost like saplings rather than blades at all. You reach the first signs of a new region. The grass here grows in tall stalks that spread outward into long, feathered tips. From above, the fields look like soft brushes laid across the planet's surface, flowing in intricate patterns that reflect the wind's dominant paths. Each stalk is hollow, but instead of a single central tube, the upper section splits into many thin channels, dozens of miniature pipes bundled together like reeds on an ancient instrument. The sound they produce is unlike anything you've heard so far. As a breeze drifts through, each channel vibrates slightly out of sync with its neighbors, creating a layered, chorus-like effect. The tones shimmer, but not with the brightness of the shimmer fields. Instead, they carry a warm texture, thicker, more human in a way, the kind of sound you'd expect from a choir singing at a distance, where voices blur beautifully together. A stronger gust slides across the rising plateau. The stalks bend deeply, their feathered tips fluttering in ripples, and the plains answer with a long, warm note that rises gently at the edges. It's not sharp, not piercing. A smooth, full-bodied tone that sits comfortably in the air, as though the grass here specializes in soft resonance designed for mid-range wind. This region feels open, welcoming, balanced. You drift lower, letting the feathered grass stalks brush the edges of your perspective. The sound up close is mesmerizing. Tiny oscillations running through each channel, each producing slightly different frequencies. When combined, they create a layered harmony that feels almost conversational. Like the plains are constantly muttering warm phrases to themselves and letting the wind piece them together into something musical. The rising groves stretch far ahead, and groves really is the best word. This doesn't feel like grass anymore. It feels like a forest made of flexible, vibrating reeds. As you pass deeper into the region, the color begins to shift gradually. The gray-green tones brighten into soft teal, then deepen into a muted turquoise. Light catches the feathered tips, causing subtle color variations that move like liquid when the wind changes. Every step alters the view, flickering between shades as though the entire landscape is gently breathing. The sound, too, evolves with color. The lighter stalks produce higher, warmer tones, slightly tremulous. The darker ones resonate deeper, adding body to the sound. Together, they weave a perpetual mid-range harmony, the kind of tone that could lull you into sleep without trying. You drift above a particularly tall grove. The stalks here must be 5 or 6 meters high, swaying pillars of motion. Their hollow cores are wider than the younger growth, giving them a richer voice. When the wind catches them, the entire grove exhales in a broad, velvet, soft sigh. And then you hear something unexpected, a rhythm, not from the wind this time, from movement below. A faint patter rises between the stalks, followed by several soft thumps spaced irregularly apart. It's not the quick, bright tapping of the shimmer fields or the deep, bassy thuds of the Twilight Hollows' creatures. This is something lighter, quicker, more playful. You drift lower. Small shapes dart between the bases of the tall stalks. Their bodies are slender, built for speed, and their limbs seem made for gripping the flexible grass. They leap onto a stalk, cling for a moment as it bends dramatically under their weight, then spring off again, sending the stalk snapping upright with a resonant thwum. The sound this produces is surprisingly melodic. When a stalk is bent and released, the tension forces air through the upper channels, producing a rising woo that seems to trail behind the creature's movement. One bends a tall reed-like stalk too far, and the channels emit a fluttering burst of tone. Another creature leaps between two stalks, activating both in the process, creating a tiny harmonic interval that hangs in the air for just a heartbeat. They aren't trying to interact with the grass is just reacting to them. But the result is a strange duet between wind and movement. The creatures scatter when a larger gust rolls through. The stalks sway deeply and the entire grove resonates with a unified exhale, a sweeping harmony that travels like a wave, cresting and falling with the wind's path. When the gust passes, the grove settles, the tones soften, the warmth returns. As you continue forward, the groves start to gather into clusters, separated by open pathways. These pathways are coated in shorter, softer grass that produces an airy whisper when stepped on. It doesn't create music the way the taller stalks do. Instead, the pathways act like breaths between the grove's larger phrases. Quiet interludes where the sound thins before building again. A gentle wind sweeps across one of these pathways, lifting the whispers into a soft rush. Then the wind hits a tall grove just beyond it, and the whispers fade into fuller, warmer tones. It's the closest thing the planet has to structured progression. Quiet, then full, then quiet again. Farther ahead, the landscape begins rising more dramatically, not steeply, but consistently. A gentle slope stretching for kilometers. The groves change shape here. The stalks grow thicker, their hollow channels widen. The feathered tips develop into fuller, more complex branching structures. The tones they produce deepen correspondingly. A steady breeze pushes uphill, and the groves respond with a strong, enveloping harmony that seems to climb with the slope, as though the wind and the plains are cooperating to create a rising progression of sound. Near the crest of the slope, the groves fall away into a plateau. Here the land opens wide again, and the wind can run freely without obstacles. The feathered stalks thin out into isolated clusters rather than continuous fields. Their tones become sporadic, appearing only when the wind strikes them directly. Between these clusters lies a new kind of grass, short, tightly packed, and filled with narrow horizontal channels rather than vertical ones. These channels vibrate with a soft, buzzing texture whenever wind presses down from above. The effect is subtle, like the plains humming through their teeth. When you drift over one of these patches, the tonal texture thickens into something lightly granular, like sand vibrating under a speaker. It isn't harsh, just dense, grounding the higher tones that still linger from the groves behind you. And then the wind changes direction. A larger front sweeps across the plateau, catching both the tall groves and the low ground channels at once. The result is an immersive harmony with layers you can feel shifting. The low patches buzz softly, the mid-height groves sigh warmly. The taller clustered stalks send shimmering overtones rising into the air. For a few seconds, everything aligns perfectly. A complete chord spreads across the plateau. Deep foundation, warm core, bright edges, all held together by the steady push of the wind. It's the closest thing this planet produces to a full balanced ensemble. No part dominates, no tone rises abruptly. Everything blends naturally, and just when it feels like the harmony will hold, the wind changes slightly and the chord dissolves into drifting threads. Ahead, the plateau ends in a descent into an entirely new region, one where the grass thickens again, but not like anything before. You'll soon enter the densest, most complex soundscape on the planet. But before moving on, you stay among the rising groves just a little longer, letting the warmth of their tones settle into the fading echo of the plateau's lost chord. The plateau begins dropping into a slope so gradual you barely notice at first. What gives it away isn't the terrain, but the sound. The warm, steady harmonies of the rising groves start tightening, bunching together like they're being guided into narrower paths. The wind itself feels more compressed, more deliberate, shaped by something ahead, and then you see it. A vast region where the grass doesn't grow in tufts or fields or sweeping belts. It grows in clusters so dense they look almost like woven fabric laid across the land. Each cluster rises into a thick mound of hollow blades, stacked tightly enough that barely any soil is visible between them. They vary in height, forming rounded shapes that sit close together like rolling dunes made entirely of living tubes. This is the densest formation you've encountered so far, the dense wave thickets. Even before you descend, the sound rises to meet you. It's not loud, it's not sharp, it's not even particularly musical at first. It's dense, a concentrated vibration that feels physical, like walking into a room full of softly humming machinery and feeling your ribs pick up the tremor before your ears do. The tones overlap so tightly, they blend into a smooth, almost velvety wall of sound. Only when you listen closer do you start to notice the layers inside it. Thousands of individual notes stacked and interwoven until no single one stands out. The wind enters the thickets exhale. You drift lower, and the world grows increasingly textured. The grass blades here aren't delicate or feathered. They're thick-walled tubes, each with multiple chambers branching inward like the pipes of a miniature organ. Every blade is capable of producing more than one tone, depending on where the wind hits it and how much pressure reaches each internal chamber. When the wind pushes across a cluster, it doesn't produce a single sound. It produces a blend, a chord inside a chord, a harmony wrapped inside a larger harmony, the sonic equivalent of layered brushstrokes creating one uniform color from a distance. Each thicket mound behaves like a resonant mass. The bass blades handle the low-end vibration, producing deep, stable hums. The mid-height blades produce smooth midtones that weave together easily. And the topmost blades, thinner and slightly more flexible, provide soft, fluttering overtones that drift in and out of the larger sound. You drift between two mounds and feel the sound tighten around you. The space between thickets narrows the wind path and compresses the notes, creating a focused, almost tunnel-like effect. The tones grow sharper, more defined, and you can suddenly hear individual voices emerging from the collective mass, quick little whistles from the blades directly above, pulsing hums from the ground-level tubes, a tremulous mid-note vibrating just to your left. Move a meter to the right, and the entire composition changes. These thickets react to positioning, to wind direction, to pressure, to even the slightest shift in airflow created by your presence. You drift forward, and the thickets ahead begin tilting with the approaching wind. Their blades sway in slow, controlled waves, bending together as though they communicate through motion. This synchronized bending changes the airflow across the region, creating a rhythmic pattern, not a repeating beat, but a slow, rolling sequence of rises and falls. The sound thickens into something warm and enveloping. It feels like the planet is wrapping an arm around the wind to guide it through the densest part of its voice. The deeper into the thickets you go, the more variation you find. Some mounds are taller, almost tree-like in height, though still composed entirely of hollow tubes bundled together. These produce long drones that hang in the air like sustained cello notes played softly. The drones continue even after the wind weakens, sustained by the internal resonance of the cluster. Other mounds are low and wide, their blades arranged in spirals that gather wind into focused bursts. When a gust hits such a mound, the resulting tone is surprisingly sharp, a mid-range note that rises quickly and then fades into the deeper background hum. These sharper notes add a flickering, bright texture that stops the soundscape from becoming too uniform. You drift over one such spiral mound just as a wind stream hits it. A bright, ringing note shoots up, short, clear, perfectly tuned by accident alone. Then another from a mound just behind it. Then another slightly lower, creating a descending pattern. Nothing on this planet intends to make music, but patterns emerge anyway because the wind is consistent and the vegetation adapts to the world's airflow like an evolving instrument. Farther ahead, the terrain shifts subtly. The mounds cluster closer together until the thickets transform into almost continuous walls, winding corridors of dense, hollow blades. The wind funnels through these natural hallways and the sound becomes more directional. Instead of broad harmonies washing across the land, you hear sequences of tones traveling through specific pathways. A large gust pushes into one of the corridors and a remarkable phenomenon occurs. The sound travels. It moves through the corridor in a clear progression. Low notes first, deep and smooth, rolling down the passage. Then mid-tones catching up, blending into a warm, moving harmony. Then faint high threads skimming across the tops of the blades. The sound doesn't radiate outward. It flows forward as though the corridor itself is carrying it to some destination beyond your sight. You follow one such corridor. The wind pulses again, sending a stronger gust down the channel. This time the sound is louder, clearer, its layers stacked with near-perfect symmetry. It feels guided, even though you know it isn't. Just wind meeting vegetation arranged in ways that naturally steer it. Halfway down the corridor, you begin hearing movement among the thickets, soft rustling, occasional light taps, quick thuds that echo differently depending on where they land. The creatures are here too, but they move differently now. Cautiously, quietly. The dense thickets aren't easy to traverse. The blades are rigid enough to be dangerous if struck too forcefully. Instead of hopping boldly, the small creatures weave through gaps at the bases of the mounds. Their bodies brush against the tubes, sending faint vibrations through the clusters, little pings and knocks that blend into the low resonance. You finally spot one. It's flatter-bodied than the others you've seen, likely adapted for squeezing through tight spaces. Its limbs are short and wide, designed more for stability than jumping. As it scurries across a patch between two mounds, its feet create tiny muted taps that disappear almost instantly under the wall of sound flowing through the thicket. But then you notice something interesting. The creatures seem to prefer moving when the wind is stronger. When the tones rise, their movements increase. When the wind calms, they go still. Not because they're reacting to danger or comfort, but because their movements are harder to detect in the noise. A built-in camouflage system, not visual but acoustic. They navigate by timing. A deep gust arrives. The thickets swell with sound, and a cluster of the creatures rushes across an open patch, their muted footsteps hidden inside the resonance. When the gust fades, they disappear again into the dense blades. The planet doesn't just make sound, it uses sound. Even its smallest residents understand that. At the far end of the dense wave thickets, the mounds begin shrinking in height and spacing out again. The wall-like formations loosen into rounded clusters once more. The wind becomes broader, less compressed, and the tones begin to spread outward instead of running through narrow channels. The sound shifts again, from focused to open, from heavy to layered. From walls of resonance to gentle, complex harmonies floating freely across the plains. Far ahead, the land brightens. A pale-colored stretch opens into a new region where the vegetation grows thin and delicate, and the tones scatter into airy, drifting trails. You'll reach that region next. But for now, you drift above the dense wave thickets a little longer, listening to the deep hum and bright flickers blending into a single, living atmosphere, shaped by nothing more than wind and time. The dense wave thickets fall away slowly, their heavy sound thinning as the ground rises into a broad, pale stretch of land. At first glance, the region ahead looks almost empty, a wide, understated plain with little variation in color. After the towering stalks and dense organ-like mounds behind you, this openness feels almost like stepping into silence. But the silence is only an illusion. The sound here doesn't vanish, it disperses. As you drift closer, the pale surface resolves into something far more intricate. The grass blades are incredibly slender, almost fragile-looking, spaced just widely enough that each one stands alone instead of forming dense mats. Their hollowness is still there, but the tubes are narrow and elongated, built less for power and more for nuance. This entire region is defined by how the wind scatters, not how it compresses. The wind scatter expands. The air moves freely here, unhindered by thick clusters or deep hollows. And because of that, the tones don't build, they drift. A breeze crosses the first field, and all at once the plain lights up with sound, light, airy strands that flicker in and out like threads of silk being tugged between invisible fingers. These notes don't sustain. They appear, shimmer briefly, and vanish. Almost no two tones are the same length. Some are bright and quick, others soft and sliding, some barely audible at all. It's the most delicate soundscape the planet has offered so far. You descend until the individual blades stand clearly beneath. Each one tapers almost to a point, with tiny perforations spiraling upward in a pattern far more random than the neat slits in earlier regions. When wind passes through these irregular holes, the tones wobble slightly, little warbles and shakes that give each blade a personality. Put enough of them together, and the air is full of fleeting micro-melodies. The first major gust hits, not strong, just broad. But broad winds behave differently here. Instead of coaxing a single unified tone, the wind scatters across thousands of isolated blades, activating them in unpredictable order. The result is a shimmering field of dozens upon dozens of short, breathy notes popping into existence all across the plain, never in a line, never in rhythm, just appearing wherever the breeze happens to find the right angle. It sounds like 1,000 tiny flutes trying out ideas at random. You drift forward and notice how the sound shifts with altitude. Higher up, the tones blend into a faint haze, a kind of musical static. But lower down, right above the tips, the sound is sharper, more defined. Every blade is playing its own little solo. The ground beneath is a muted grey colour, broken by occasional streaks of pale mineral veins. These veins reflect heat differently than the soil, creating uneven pockets of warm and cool air. As the wind moves over these pockets, its density changes slightly, enough to shift the pitch of nearby blades by tiny amounts. The whole plain becomes a living patchwork of drifting microtones, always fluctuating, never repeating. The small creatures return here too, but in a very different way. You first notice them by their absence of sound. In earlier regions, their hops and taps pierced the landscape. Here they barely make a noise. The windscatter expanse favors lightness. Anything heavy stands out. Anything quiet survives. A faint rustle sweeps through a section of grass, but the creatures themselves make almost no percussive taps. Their bodies are slimmer, more elongated, and when they land, they spread their weight across flexible appendages that barely disturb the hollow blades. Still, every now and then, one missteps. A hollow blade bends. A soft puff of air escapes its perforations. A tiny airy chirp rises into the plain. It's subtle, so subtle you almost miss it. But the sound is unmistakable. A creature steps again, this time catching two blades at once and producing a faint double tone, like a whispery two-note chord. They freeze when the wind stops. Not because they fear predators, though there may be some hiding far deeper in the grass, but because movement without wind is too loud in this kind of soundscape. Any misplaced noise stands out when the breeze goes still. Another gust arrives and the creatures move again, weaving through the slender stalks with renewed boldness, hidden inside the scattered shimmer of tones. The wind picks up for a moment, not dramatically, but enough to produce something entirely new. When stronger winds hit the expanse, they do something no other region does. They create gliding tones. Long, sliding notes stretch across the field as the breeze sweeps over multiple blades in a single continuous motion. Each blade adds a fraction of pitch, creating a single glissando that arcs across the grass like a soft sonic wave. You can follow it visually too. The blades bend in sequence, producing the rising or falling pitch as the gust travels. From above, it looks like a ripple moving through a field of white reeds, and the sound matches perfectly. These gliding tones don't last long, only as long as the gust itself, but when they fade, they leave a faint, airy echo behind, as though the plains briefly held on to the sound before letting it go. You drift toward a darker patch on the horizon, the first sign that the landscape is shifting again. But before reaching it, you pass over a strange formation. A circle of grass where the blades are noticeably thicker and arranged in a loose ring. Inside the ring, the blades are shorter and more uniform. Outside the ring, the blades are taller and more flexible. When wind passes through this formation, the tones create a gentle pulse. Not a rhythm. The planet rarely offers true rhythms, but a cyclical rise and fall in volume. The ring seems to catch the wind, amplify it, then release it in a soft surge that travels outward like a slow heartbeat. You drift around the ring and hear the effect clearly. The wind enters, the tones swell, then the air thins and the sound retreats. It feels like the expanse breathing. Farther ahead, the ground begins changing texture. The pale soil darkens into slate grey. Sparse ridges and tiny cracks become more frequent. The grass shifts with it. The blades become sturdier, more upright, more aligned. And the tones begin tightening from scattered whispers into more structured patterns. The windscatter expanse thins behind you, its airy, fleeting melodies fading into the open soundscape. Ahead lies a region where the wind no longer scatters. It channels. Focused winds, narrow pathways, and tones that can carry for kilometers without breaking. But before you leave the expanse fully, one final gust travels across it, carrying the last shimmering notes behind you. Tiny, delicate tones floating freely in the thinning air, fading with a softness that feels almost weightless. Next, the wind begins sharpening, and the plains prepare to answer with sharper voices. The windscatter expanse narrows almost without warning. One moment the plains are wide and open, filled with drifting microtones and airy flutters, and the next the ground begins folding gently inward, guiding the wind into long, narrowing pathways. It's subtle at first, barely noticeable, just a faint tightening of the breeze. But as you drift deeper, the wind stops behaving like a broad-fronted force and instead begins slipping into defined streams, smooth, concentrated currents that move with purpose across the land. And the grass here has evolved for that exact behavior. This is the Channel-Walled Straits. The first change you hear is the focus. The scattered whispers of the previous region fade into firm, directed tones. No more bursts of randomness, no more flickering flutes rising wherever the breeze happens to land. Now the sound aligns. The grass blades in the straits stand taller than the slender ones behind you, still thin but far sturdier, each one growing in long vertical rows that run parallel across the terrain like natural wind guides. Their hollow cores are perfectly straight, and the openings near their tips are shaped in narrow slits that can only resonate when wind hits them from very specific angles, which, here, the wind naturally does. As you drift lower into the straits, the sound becomes clearer and more deliberate. A single gust enters a row and produces a pure, unwavering tone that holds steady as long as the wind maintains pressure. Not loud, not high, just incredibly clean. The tone carries far, sliding up the row of blades like a breath pushed through aligned pipes. Then another gust enters a neighboring row, producing a slightly different note. Perhaps a fraction higher, perhaps a fraction deeper. When both gusts run side by side, they create something rare on this planet: true intervals. Two tones, steady and stable, resonating in harmony as though the plains have suddenly discovered structure. Not randomness, not layered chaos, not scattered melodies, but order. You travel above a series of these long channels, listening as the tones rise and fall with the wind's strength. The sound is almost hypnotic, smooth, drifting, consistent, like standing between two long metal wires and listening as they hum in the wind. Except here the effect is organic and infinitely more complex. The ground beneath reveals why the wind behaves so predictably. The soil here isn't entirely soil. It's partially eroded stone, soft, porous rock that's been carved by centuries of constant airflow. Shallow channels run the length of the straits, some barely half a meter deep, others several meters tall. These channels act like shallow trenches, but they don't trap the wind like the Twilight Hollows did. Instead, they shape it, guide it, focus it, and the wind in turn guides the grass. You drift down into one of the channels. The walls are lined with thick, fibrous vegetation that doesn't make much sound by itself. It functions more like insulation. It prevents wind from escaping sideways, ensuring the air keeps moving forward along a single path. The grass on the channel floor stands in perfectly straight rows, following the direction of airflow. A gust arrives. The entire channel vibrates. A single, clear tone shoots forward like a ribbon of sound pulled tight and released. It's smooth, pure, unbroken, and it doesn't fade when the gust weakens. The hollow cores of the blades continue sustaining the tone for a few seconds after the wind moves on. A gentle trailing echo that glides down the channel before dissolving into silence. The next gust brings a deeper tone, and the blades respond instantly, lowering their pitch to match the pressure of the incoming air. This region doesn't produce random melodies like the windscatter expanse. It produces smooth, modulating lines, tones that move gradually up and down in pitch, depending on wind pressure. The result is a drifting soundscape that behaves almost like a single voice humming to itself,